need to check the list of used names first, then write the story. The band names are Claire, Maisie, Derek, Dr., Patterson, Nora, Garrett, Renata, Sandra, Vivienne, Thomas, Kelsey, Owen, Patricia, Joanna, Bay, Ivy, June, Theo, Miles, Lily, Marcus, Sophie, Rachel, Elise, Brandon, Conrad, Vanessa, Anna, Wesley, Pamela, Dara, Adelaide, Nathan, Dominic, Raymond, Serena, Joel, Phoebe, Tatum, Audrey, Fletcher, Bridget, Sylvia, Harrison, Caleb, Priya, Fiona, Greg, Ellen. New names I'll use: Lena, narrator, Scott, husband, Amber, the other woman, Diane, best friend, Roger, Scott's father, Carol, Scott's mother. The clock on the microwave read 11:47 p.m. when my husband sat down across from me at the kitchen table and told me he was in love with someone else. He didn't stumble over it. He didn't cry. He just said it the way you'd tell someone their flight was delayed, like it was unfortunate but ultimately out of his hands. His coffee mug was sitting between us, still steaming, and I remember thinking how strange it was that I'd made him coffee. That 20 minutes ago, I hadn't known my marriage was over. So I'd made him coffee like I always did, because that's what you do when your husband comes home late on a Tuesday. His name was Scott. Is Scott. We've been married for 6 years. I'm a family law attorney. I've sat across from hundreds of people in that exact moment, the moment right after the ground disappears. I always knew what to say to them. That night I couldn't say anything at all. I just looked at him, and then I looked at a coffee, and then I looked at a cafe, and then I looked at him again. And he kept talking. Her name was Amber. She worked in the leasing office of the commercial real estate firm that shared a floor with his architecture company. He'd known her for 8 months. He was 38 years old, and he was telling me about this woman like she was the first real thing that had ever happened to him. I didn't plan this, he said. I almost laughed. That's what they all say. Every single one of them, across every conference table I'd ever sat at. They never plan it. It just happens. Like weather. How long have you known? I asked. I meant how long had he known he wanted to leave? He understood the question. A few months, he said. I wanted to be sure. Sure. He wanted to be sure before he blew up 6 years. I appreciated the consideration. I asked him if he loved her. He said yes. I asked him if he wanted a divorce. He said yes. I asked him if he understood what that meant. Financially, legally, in terms of the life we had built together. The house in Naperville, the joint accounts, the condo we still co-owned with his parents as a rental property in the city. He waved his hand, actually waved his hand, like he was clearing smoke. Take whatever you want, he said. I'm not going to fight you on any of it. She doesn't care about money. We're going to start fresh. I looked at him for a long time after that. This man I had loved, this man who had cried at our wedding, who used to leave notes in my coat pockets in winter so I'd find them on cold mornings, who once drove 40 minutes in the snowstorm to bring me soup when I had the flu. I looked at him and I thought, you have no idea what you just said. But I didn't say that. I picked up my coffee, which had gone cold, and I told him I'd have my assistant contact him about next steps. He blinked. We should probably talk more. Good night, Scott. He slept in the guest room. By morning, he was gone. Here's the thing about being a family law attorney going through a divorce. You know exactly how this works. And knowing exactly how it works does not make it hurt less. It just makes you a very efficient griever. I filed within 2 weeks. I had the paperwork clean and organized in a way that made my paralegal, who had been with me for 4 years, look at me with something close to alarm. You okay? She asked. I'm fine, I said. Let's talk about the Hendricks case. I wasn't fine, I said. Let's talk about the Hendricks case. I wasn't fine. I cried every morning in the shower, and then I washed my face, and I went to work, and I was very, very competent all day long. That was the deal I made with myself. You get the shower. The rest of the day is mine. My best friend Diane came over the first Friday after Scott left and brought a bottle of Malbec, and the kind of Chinese takeout order that implies she planned to stay for a while. We sat on the kitchen floor because I'd been avoiding the living room, too many Saturday mornings folded into that couch, and she let me talk until I ran out of things to say. He really just waved his hand, she said. Like this. I demonstrated. Incredible, she said. What an absolute. He's not a bad person. She looked at me. He's not, I said. He just did a bad thing. That was true, and I knew it was true, and it didn't make the mornings easier, but it was true. Scott wasn't a villain. He was a man who fell in love with the wrong person at the wrong time and handled it badly. I'd seen real villains. Men who hid assets in shell companies, women who coached their kids to lie to custody evaluators. Scott wasn't that. Scott was just gone. What bothered me more, honestly, was the confidence, the ease of it. Take whatever you want. She doesn't care about money. 6 years of marriage, a house, 2 car payments, and he dissolved all of it with a wave of his hand, because he was in love, and love would sort everything out. I had a feeling Amber hadn't been told exactly what everything looked like on paper. The divorce process for us was mostly civil. We communicated through email and through my associate, who I'd asked to technically handle my case because even I knew better than to fully represent myself. Scott got a lawyer, a decent one actually, someone I knew professionally, and I sent her a text that just said, "Play straight with me, and this will be easy for everyone." She replied with a thumbs up. It was fine. What was not fine was my mother-in-law. Carol had adored me, or I thought she had. She'd called me her daughter-in-law and her friend, which is a thing people say and don't always mean, but she'd seemed to mean it. She'd texted me recipes. We'd done a wine and painting class together once, just the two of us. When Scott and I had a bad patch 3 years in, nothing like this, just a rough winter. She'd called me, not him, to check in. About a month after Scott moved out, I got a voicemail from Carol asking if I was coming to the family dinner that Sunday. Roger's birthday. I stood in my kitchen and played it twice. She knew we'd filed. She knew the house was in the process of being listed. She knew I was sleeping alone in a bedroom that still smelled like Scott's laundry detergent because I hadn't gotten around to washing the duvet yet, and she wanted to know if I was coming to dinner. I called her back and, very calmly, explained that I thought it might be a little awkward, given the circumstances. She said she understood, but that I was still family. I thanked her. I didn't go. Diane, when I told her, was less restrained than me. I won't repeat what she said, but she was right. Scott called me about 6 weeks in, not through the lawyers, directly to my cell, which I allowed because we were trying to keep this from becoming a war and direct communication sometimes helps. He said he'd been thinking about the rental condo. He wanted to buy out my share. Okay, I said. Have your attorney send over an offer. I was thinking we could handle it informally, Scott. Have your attorney send over an offer. A pause. You're being very formal. I'm being appropriate. Another pause. You're being very formal. I'm being appropriate. Another pause. She's moving in with me, he said. I didn't know if that was explanation or apology or neither. Into the apartment I'm renting. She's moving in. That's your business, I said. I just thought you should know. Why? He didn't have an answer for that. We said goodbye and hung up, and I stood by my office window for a minute, looking out at the parking lot below, at a woman trying to wrestle a stroller into her car, and I thought about Amber moving into Scott's new apartment. I thought about what she must imagine the future looks like. I thought about what she didn't know. There were things she didn't know, things that weren't my job to tell her. Here's where it gets complicated, and I want to be honest about it, because I've turned this over in my head more times than I can count, and I still don't have a clean answer. About 3 weeks after Scott filed, I got a call from the firm that managed our rental condo. Routine stuff. Tenant was renewing, some maintenance issues, standard documents for me to co-sign since I was still on the property ownership. Fine. But in the course of that conversation, the property manager mentioned something about the building's structural inspection report, and she mentioned it in a way that made me think she thought I already knew. I didn't. I asked her to send it to me. I read it that night. The building had a foundation issue. Not catastrophic, not dangerous, not a safety hazard, but significant enough that a full remediation would likely be required within the next 2 to 4 years. The estimate was somewhere in the range of $80,000 to $120,000, shared proportionally among unit owners. Our share, as co-owners of one unit, would be roughly 30 to 40,000. This was not currently public knowledge. It was in an official inspection document, accessible to owners, but not yet disclosed to potential buyers or discussed in any HOA meeting. Scott wanted to buy me out of my share. I sat with that document for a long time. On one hand, I had no legal obligation to volunteer this information beyond what standard disclosure requirements already covered, and those requirements, in our case, were Scott's attorney's job to discover through due diligence. I wasn't his attorney, I was his divorcing wife. Anything he didn't find in discovery was on him and his counsel. On the other hand, I knew and he didn't. And part of me, I'll be honest, part of me thought, let him figure it out. I didn't call him. I didn't tell his attorney. I made sure all the official documents were in order on my end, which they were, and I let the process move forward. His attorney didn't catch it. Scott bought out my share at market rate, no adjustment for the foundation issue. The transaction closed on a Thursday. I signed the paperwork, wired him his portion of our joint account balance as agreed, and that was that. I want to be clear, I didn't lie. I didn't hide documents. I didn't do anything that crossed a legal or ethical line in my professional capacity, but I knew something he would have wanted to know, and I chose not to go out of my way to tell him. I've thought about that a lot since. I still think about it. The house sold faster than I expected. We'd priced it well because I'd done my research and because I wanted it done, and we had 3 offers in the first weekend. We accepted one on a Monday morning. I remember sitting in my car, in the parking garage at my office, and signing the acceptance form on my phone, and then sitting there for another 10 minutes before I could make myself go inside. 6 years of weekends. The yard I'd planted hostas in because I'd read they were impossible to kill and still managed to kill 2 of them before the third one caught on. The kitchen where we'd had dinner parties and arguments, and a very memorable New Year's Eve when the power went out, and we ended up playing cards by candlelight until 2 in the morning, laughing until our faces hurt. The bedroom where I'd spent the last weeks, listening to the silence where another person used to be. It sold. Someone else would live there. I hoped they'd be happy. I bought a condo about 3 miles away. 3rd floor, 2 bedrooms, a little balcony that faces east, so the morning light comes in while I have coffee. Diane helped me move. We ordered pizza and argued about where the bookshelf should go, and she stayed until almost midnight, even though she had work the next morning, because she's that kind of person, and I am lucky to have her. The night she left, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, and I thought, I can do this. The thought surprised me a little. I wasn't expecting to feel anything but sad that night, but there it was, something small and stubborn under all the sadness. Something that felt like the beginning of okay. It was Diane who told me. Of course it was Diane. She had kept her ear to the ground since the beginning, not in a gossipy way, but in the way that a good friend monitors the weather on your behalf. She called me on a Wednesday evening about 4 months after the divorce was finalized. I was making pasta. She didn't even say hello. Are you sitting down? I'm standing at the stove. Okay, so. You know how Scott and Amber moved into that apartment together? Yes, she moved out. I turned the burner down. When? Like 2 weeks ago, apparently. My coworker knows someone who works in that building. I know, very indirect source. But the story is, she just left. Gave her notice at her job, too. Nobody knows where she went. I didn't say anything. There's more, Diane said. Of course there was. The condo thing, the foundation thing. Apparently Scott found out. I don't know exactly how, but I heard something about him getting a special assessment notice from the HOA, $40,000. I stirred the pasta. Lena, I'm here. Are you? How do you feel? I thought about it. Genuinely thought about it. Standing there in my kitchen with the steam rising off the pot and the late evening light coming through the window above the sink. I don't know, I said honestly. I think I feel sad for him, which is weird. It's not weird, Diane said, which was a lie. She thought it was absolutely weird. I could hear it. But she said it anyway because she's kind. I finished making my pasta. I ate it on the balcony. The sun was doing something extraordinary in the west. All that orange and pink. And I watched it for a while before I let myself think about Scott again. He'd wanted a fresh start. He'd been so certain. That certainty. That ease, the hand wave, take whatever you want. She doesn't care about money. 8 months of feeling something electric and new, and he'd built a whole future on it in his head and then stepped off the ledge, expecting to fly. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to say that clearly because I think people expect you to feel triumphant in these situations, and sometimes maybe you do, but I didn't. Mostly I felt tired and a little hollow and relieved, somehow, that the part where I was waiting for something to happen was over. He called me about a week later. I almost didn't answer. I did. Hey, he said. Hey. A long pause. I wanted to say, I heard you sold the house. A few months ago, yeah. I heard it went quickly. It did. Another pause. He was circling something. I recognized the pattern. I'd watched people circle hard things in my office for years. You just wait. I also heard, he said slowly, about the condo. Okay, the foundation thing. His voice was careful, measured, but I could hear it underneath. The question he was really asking. What about it? I said, not unkindly. Did you know? When we finalized the buyout? I sat with that question for exactly as long as it deserved. Scott, I said, you had an attorney. Due diligence was her job. I had all the official documents in order on my end. A very long silence. That's not really an answer, he said. No, I said. It's not. I heard him exhale. Lena, I hope you're okay, I said, and I meant it. I genuinely do. I hope the assessment isn't as bad as the estimate. I hope you land somewhere good. She left, he said. Quiet, like he wasn't sure he meant to say it. I know. Did you know she would? I thought about Amber, a woman I'd never met. Had only seen in one photo that Diane had somewhat guiltily shown me on her phone. Young, bright-faced, standing in front of something that looked like a rooftop bar. A woman who'd believed in a version of Scott that was only possible before real life got its hands on him again. No, I said, I didn't know. But I wasn't surprised. He didn't have anything to say to that. Take care of yourself, I said, and I hung up. I went back to work the next morning like I always did. My first appointment was a new client. Woman in her mid-40s, divorce just initiated. 2 kids, a husband who'd been hiding business income in a family LLC for 3 years. She sat across from me and her hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear exactly, but from that particular exhaustion of someone who has been holding themselves together for a very long time. I knew that feeling. Okay, I said, and I pushed a box of tissues across the desk toward her, which is something I always do not, because I expect people to cry, but because I want them to know it's allowed. Let's start at the beginning. Tell me what's happened. And she did. That's the part nobody talks about when you go through something like this. How it changes you professionally in ways that are hard to explain without sounding like a Hallmark movie. I was already good at my job. I don't say that to be arrogant. I just was. But there is a difference between understanding someone's pain and having stood inside something like it yourself. I sat across from her and I listened differently than I used to. Not better, necessarily. Just differently. After she left, I sat at my desk for a few minutes, outside my window. It was one of those sharp blue October days that feel like the air has been cleaned out overnight. Leaves on the trees along the parking lot had gone red and gold. Someone was walking a golden retriever on the sidewalk below, the dog stopping every 6 feet to investigate something invisible, the person on the other end of the leash patient and unhurried. I thought about Scott, not with anger, not anymore, and not even really with sadness. More with a kind of tenderness that surprised me, the way you sometimes feel tender toward a version of your life that's over. We'd been good to each other for a long time, then we hadn't been. That was the whole story, really. I turned back to my desk. I had 3 more appointments that afternoon, a brief to finish, and a case that was going to require every bit of my attention for the next 4 weeks. The box of tissues was still sitting at the corner of the desk where I'd pushed it. I moved it back to its usual spot. I had work to do. It's been almost 2 years now. I tell people I'm doing well, and it's true in the way that true things sometimes take time to feel completely true. But it is true. My condo has become home in the way that places become home, slowly, through accumulation. I know which floorboard creaks near the bathroom. I know exactly how long my coffee maker takes on cold mornings. I have a plant on the balcony that I have somehow not killed. Diane got engaged last spring. I'm in the wedding. We've argued cheerfully about exactly 3 aspects of the planning and agreed warmly about everything else. And I've started to understand that this Diane in a white dress, my opinion on centerpieces mattering to someone, a Saturday in June, somewhere in our future, might be what the good part looks like now. I don't know what happened to Amber. I thought about trying to find out once, then decided it wasn't mine to look for. She was someone who made choices and is living with them, the same as the rest of us. Scott, I've heard, is still in the city, still at the architecture firm. We haven't spoken since that phone call. I don't expect we will. I wish him nothing bad. I really don't. I wish him the kind of ordinary, quiet life where nothing dramatic happens, where Tuesday evenings are uneventful, where he learns to appreciate what he has before it leaves. I have a date next week, a friend of Diane's, an ER physician named, well, that part's still unwritten. I'm trying not to plan too much. That's new for me. A family law attorney who spent 6 years cross-referencing every possible outcome and building contingencies for contingencies. And now I'm trying to show up to my own life without a brief prepared. It's harder than it sounds, but I'm getting there. The balcony faces east, the coffee is good, the plant is still alive. That's enough for now. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually happened. Not the events themselves, but the pattern underneath them, the shape of it. Scott made a decision based on certainty he hadn't earned. He was certain Amber was different, certain love would hold everything together once the inconvenient parts, the house, the paperwork, the marriage, were cleared away. Certain I would grieve quietly, while he built something new and shining with someone who'd never seen him be ordinary. That certainty wasn't confidence. It was avoidance dressed up as confidence. And avoidance, in my experience, both personal and professional, has a way of presenting the bill eventually. You don't get to skip the hard parts, you just get to choose when you face them. I think about the moment he waved his hand and said, "Take whatever you want." I've replayed it more times than I'd like to admit. At first it made me angry, then it made me sad. Now it just makes me think about how much we reveal when we think we're being generous. He wasn't being generous. He was being careless with something he'd already decided didn't matter, and carelessness like that doesn't stay contained to one decision, it spreads. It reached his due diligence on the condo. It reached whatever he promised Amber about what their life together would look like. It reached everything. Here's what I know about integrity, not the word, but the actual thing. It's not about being perfect. Lord knows I wasn't. I sat with that foundation report for days and I made a choice that I still turn over in my mind. I didn't lie, but I also didn't go out of my way to protect someone who had stopped protecting me. Whether that was right or wrong, I genuinely don't know. What I do know is that I had to look at myself clearly and call it what it was, and carry it honestly instead of pretending it was something cleaner than it was. That's harder than either lying or telling the truth. It's just living with the complicated version of yourself, which is the only version any of us actually have. The intelligence part, the part I leaned on hardest through all of it, wasn't legal strategy. It was learning to stop explaining myself to people who had already decided what they thought. Scott had decided I was the obstacle between him and his real life. Carol had decided family dinner was still an appropriate ask. Amber had decided a man willing to blow up a 6-year marriage for her was a man worth betting on. None of them were interested in a different version of events, and I spent too long in those early weeks trying to construct one anyway, trying to be reasonable enough, clear enough, fair enough that everyone would understand. You can't reason someone into seeing you when they've chosen not to look. What I had to build instead was simpler and harder, the ability to keep moving without an audience, to do the next right thing without needing it witnessed or validated or applauded. That's what resilience actually feels like from the inside. Not strength exactly, more like stubbornness. The refusal to let someone else's worst decision become the final word on your life. Diane still checks in on me like I might need emergency care. I love her for it. I don't need it anymore, but I love her for it. My balcony faces east. I have a date next week. The plant is still alive. That's not a small thing. That's the whole thing.